Welcome to the Data Democracy. Presented by renowned O'Reilly author Ole Olesen-Bagneux. Empowered by Xenia. Make your data accessible and discoverable by anyone, anywhere, at any time.
Hi everybody, I'm Ole Olesen-Bagneux, Chief Evangelist in Xenia and the author of the Enterprise Data Catalog published with O'Reilly. On the Data Democracy, I have conversations about new trends in data and AI with pioneering data practitioners and data leaders. Today's guest is Jessica Talisman, and this one was a pleasure. I have known Jessica for a long time. We have been exchanging ideas for all that time. And she also has the same background than me in library information science, which has made our conversation really stimulating. Jessica is a senior information architect with Adobe. Jessica is all about information architecture, taxonomies, ontologies, building information systems that enhance user experience and support business goals. And she is a strong advocate for knowledge graphs. My takeaways from my conversation with Jessica. First, never, ever underestimate library and information science. This scientific field has a lot of answers to the problems that the data community is facing, and it's becoming apparent the more we intermingle the data community and people with a background like me and Jessica, like from library information science. It's a very, very small field, so it's quite natural that people don't know it, but we are trained in technology in a very deep and very unique way. And so the perspective we bring, as you will hear Jessica in a moment, is quite unique. Okay, I think the second takeaway is something that the community is beginning to realize at large also. It's the end of the LLM happy-go-lucky era. People are beginning to understand that AI and LLMs in particular, generative AI, needs some kind of structure and governance around it in order for it to work. Jessica was one of the first to point out the necessity for knowledge graphs when working with large language models. And she really got a lot of negative feedback from that in the beginning, but she insisted, and now we can see that that argument has won. Jessica's perspective has won. And third, on this episode, so my third takeaway, on this episode, I took the liberty to talk to someone that I don't consider a typical person from the data community. Instead, Jessica has a little different perspective. Some of my guests previously have also had that in terms of the education. And I think that brings unique perspectives. We all need to do that from time to time. So that's my third takeaway. Reach out to people with different educational backgrounds. It's really very necessary to expand your horizon and to solve the problems that you're working with in data. Okay, enough of me talking. Let's hear what Jessica has to say. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Ole. How are you?
I'm fine. What about you?
Good. I'm doing great. Thank you.
It's great to hear. It's great to have you on. So for the guests, I would you care to explain what you've done in your career, where you're based, and
Sure.
Perhaps your plans for the future?
Sure. So I am a senior information architect at Adobe right now. I just joined a couple weeks ago. I'm actually going into week 3, but I've worked in various parts of the IT landscape. So worked for Overstock and e-commerce, ed tech, Department of Justice. I've had a career where I've been able to touch a lot of different spaces and see a lot of commonalities and things that are novel for certain spaces. As far as where I'm going, I really love and enjoy what I do. I take a lot of what I've learned and also professionally practiced as a librarian in my past life and apply it to this IT landscape.
That sounds very cool. I mean, Seen from the outside, I've heard and read about Adobe, and it's a really cool technology. It really is, because there is so much fantastic content inside the Adobe platform. Obviously, I have to ask how it feels to work at Adobe.
Quite honestly, I've never said this before, but it feels like I've arrived from a metadata information management landscape
Mm-hmm.
perspective. It's a leader in the field. And
Mm-hmm.
so to be on the cutting edge of a lot of discovery and innovation in AI is pretty exciting. It is a great culture.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
It's remote friendly, meaning that, you're not constrained or forced to come in an office, although people want to because
Mm-hmm.
it's such a great culture. And it really respects each individual and takes care of each employee. So you have a real sense of belonging. And so there's sort of a personalized caring aspect to the corporate culture.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really great, I gotta
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to dive into, as I said in the introduction, I have been following you for a while. We've been exchanging ideas for a while. I always enjoy your posts and your ideas. And so, one of the things that I noticed at the beginning and like pretty consistently throughout the AI hype, that I don't know where we are on that curve right now, but I definitely think that the honeymoon is over, right? Not that I have a negative approach to AI, but since the beginning, you put forward some pretty interesting thoughts. You insisted on a knowledge graph first approach during the early days of the large language model hype. And what kind of response did you get to that? What were the consequences of that? If you want to
Even
share.
Absolutely. I mean, even within an organization, with the approach, the response was sort of naysaying,
Mm,
a lot of pushing back, a lot of belief in and maintaining relational databases and just charging ahead, which then led to a second phase in the response where a lot of people were thinking, oh, we only need a vector database. That's all. We can skip the knowledge graph. It was a constant response of there's a shortcut. This is too
mm,
much work. There's a shortcut. That's not necessary. What I was seeing from my side was structured data.
mm,
And the priority and value of structured data in terms of knowledge graphs, and also playing with a bunch of different AI models, I was able to see pretty transparently that the data was clearly structured, and training data, it was pretty clear where the training data came from in matching output to input.
mhm, mhm. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So for the listeners, I guess a lot of listeners would understand the technical details of what you just said, but could you share a little more light on what a knowledge graph allows for in this context that you just described?
Sure.
What are the advantages of a knowledge graph?
It adds context and meaning to
Hmm.
data. So it structures data in such a way so that it creates natural parameters, descriptive context, which is really important. And especially in the English language where it's very difficult. English is a hard language. And
Mm,
so one word can have multiple meanings.
mhm,
And it really depends on context, including relationships,
mhm,
explicit structures of, it's really cognitive modeling. And
mhm,
that's what's important. I think we've gotten a little bit off kilter in terms of when we anthropomorphize something like ChatGPT and we assume that it's this oracle,
mhm.
any sort of AI, like Zoltar. If anyone knows what Zoltar is, it's a little fortune machine. And so the sense that this thing's human, but what makes us human is cognition.
Mm,
And our brains work in a way that, not so much statistically, how we form concepts and the relationship of those concepts. That's how human memory works. That's how computer memory works. So, the fact that we would launch into AI and throw that all away was perplexing to me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I can understand like the early days of wanting to like skip the hassle, quite simply, of organizing data and working with that cognition element that you described.
And when we talk about, like, for example, something that's organic and natural in a knowledge graph are neural networks. That's something that occurs pretty organically or naturally when you have a well-shaped graph. And neural networks, again, help to drive the conversation with AI.
Yeah.
We were not looking broadly as a community at cognition and how those neural networks play into human cognition and computer cognition.
Yeah. So for me, it's like, it's just super sad that happened in that moment in time, because like it's logical, and at the same time it's a little sad, right? But luckily I think it's already like materializing that you need this kind of combination. You need the cognitive layer, the metadata layer, the knowledge graph to really to really benefit from the powers of generative AI.
Yeah.
In general, and this is a broad question, but we already touched upon it a little bit, but to you, Jessica, how can the data community, or I'd even say the tech community, how can it learn from library information science? I mean, we share this background and we have seen the light, but to expand on that and make others see the light as well, how can we learn from the library information science data?
I'll give an example. So before we started recording, we touched just briefly on the FRBR method. But, in library and information science, there has for hundreds of years, and FRBR is younger than that, but there has been some modeling of provenance, like rights, the rights to, and that's a big hot topic in AI, is maintaining copyright, provenance, proprietary data. And that's something that the library and information space has done using something called the FRBR model, which is functional requirements for bibliographic records, meaning that like the original work, that never goes away. Any iteration, rendition of that original work, that inheritance is maintained. And I think, from an AI perspective, we're all scratching our heads of how we can maintain provenance and rights, copyright, and protect it. And especially for artists and authors. And what's interesting is it's sitting right in front of us. We see how that's done, and it's even in a graph shape through Library of Congress, BIAF. It is a knowledge graph shape that's maintained. What had to happen in the library and information science world was there had to be broad agreements across the space that these records would maintain the shape. They would be published in the shape. They could be Dewey Decimal. They could be Library of Congress. There was translation between the two, but no matter what, the rights were protected.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that's a great example right there. For the listeners, I just want to expand that the FRBR model or FRBR model is like it's a layer. It's a four layer model of abstraction layers, basically saying that we have an idea of a work that can be materialized in various ways, or mediated in various ways and materialized accordingly. So an idea as a given work can be an opera, a theater play, or a book, given on the way it's mediated, and then it can be materialized in a specific play or a specific copy of a book, and so forth, right? And all these ideas are native to library information science, but they are so and they are so evident to this field, and in the same time they are so strange and new to tech and data. And I think that is so fun, because it
is fun.
It feels like being a very, very old person saying, but you should remember.
That's what I feel like. A little naggy and a little bit back in the day.
But at the same time, right? I think I mean, I don't know what your take is, and this is a very open question, but I've just been blown away by the positive energy of being in a room with data engineers, computer scientists, and having an understanding of their reality of technology in general, data management in specifically, and then adding these perspectives to a given data management context. I think that is so powerful. There's so much energy in that clash, right?
And I think what makes the space tricky when people, data engineers, for example, try to not so much incorporate, but understand these models or these ways of doing things from the library and information space, it's very abstract. I don't know if you remember learning, but like the FRBR concept at first was really hard for me to wrap my mind around until you put it in practice and you start creating those records. It takes practice. And, the difference is slowing down to really digest the impact, understand how from the, within that life cycle, being able to practice and see the output. It takes doing this more than one time, for example, modeling things in like a FRBR structure, or for example, Dublin Core. Dublin Core is a wonderful standard for metadata, but it has that abstraction.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think like, if we want to make a parallel to a data universe, data architecture and technology universe, let's take the distinctions of modeling, right? You have like conceptual, physical, these various layers of modeling, right? Yeah. What is that? That is FRBR. If you want to build a model, a knowledge graph, for example, you should be very well aware that there is a distinction of creating the meta model of the knowledge graph, like the structure, the conceptual structure of the knowledge graph, and the physical instantiation of that meta model, right? There's a distinction that needs to be made, and that distinction touches upon the layers of abstraction that you need to understand in nodes and edges, right? Which is pretty much the same thing as FRBR, right? So it's been around for
And one of the advantages of that, though, is that you're trying to create a graph, for example, like if you create a knowledge graph. If you don't have those layers of abstraction with clean edges and nodes, you end up with anti-patterns. And I think people are finding that quite a bit with, for example, using Wikidata. There can be problems. Yeah,
please expand on that one. That's interesting.
So with Wikidata, having clear lines and distinctions with, for example, classes and properties in determining which is which, having clean taxonomies, because that's the foundation of knowledge graphs, without recursive loops or relationship clashes. And because Wikidata is user generated and basically governed and mitigated by DBpedia, which is a larger knowledge bus, and the knowledge bus is a totally different game, that there's reconciliation of duplicates or matches, same as, for example. And so it's really important that those nodes and edges be clean, because if there are loops and clashes, self-referential data, then you end up, your graph's going to be very expensive. It's going to be cycling, trying to figure out what's what. And so having clear direction and incrementally building and adding, rather than coming out of the gate hot with every single concept modeled in all of Wikidata, you're going to be just capturing something that just exists in that one instance and may be edited, governed, and change. Wikidata changes. It has a high rate of change, so it's hard to maintain.
Yeah, that is a lot. Well, it's a lot to digest, but I think it's also it's very explanatory of like the necessity of thinking in terms of making information architecture and understanding in totality the potential of library information science in a broader tech context. I mean, this is the first time I discussed this perspective so much in depth on my podcast, and one of the things that I personally remember is being a student 20 years ago, 15 years ago. Anyway, when I studied library information science, there was this division in the field. There were like two tracks, and the one track was the one that said, okay, we are library information science. We make standards for national libraries. We make the MARC format, the machine readable cataloging format for national bibliographies. It's a wonderful format. It's very, very complex. It's a little old school, but it's an absolute wonderful format. And I dare say it even saved, I used to say that it saved the literary heritage of the world. I think it would have disappeared without a format that could have, that made it relevant, that made physical literature relevant in a digital and even at just the energy-based media world, television and radio. So I think it saved the literary heritage of the world, that format. Nothing less. But like when I studied, at least, maybe also when you studied, I think there were two camps, right? There were this camp that they said, okay, this is what we do. We do this. We have a lot of standards. We have a lot of methodologies. We are technically more savvy than a lot of people know, but we work for the library institutions of the world, and that is what we do. And that was a beautiful world. I loved that world. I still love that world. I love it. I love it. But it also had this big challenge that was the World Wide Web, right? And the monopoly of searching for data and information and knowledge suddenly disappeared. So there were no monopoly anymore. People could search free, whatever they wanted to find in a commercial structure, right? And I remember, can you remember those days? Like when you had you had to make a choice there. You had to say, okay, I am a deeply specialized technician in a deeply specialized world that not a lot of people know of, or I put myself out there. I contribute with what I've got in a technological setting, so I can contribute to the development of RDF, everything like that, right? So you had to take that choice at a certain moment in time.
I've been thinking about that a lot lately, just those foundations and that divide. And I was thinking about MARC records. Again, they're brilliant.
They are
and that
brilliant.
whole system, they're so brilliant. But I started researching, it clicked in my head, and it's so silly because some of the things right in front of your nose sometimes are the most obvious things, or the most prolific. RDA.
Yeah.
Resource descriptive access. It's almost like the precursor to RDF. We don't think about it that way, but I went back and read a bunch of the different standards, looking back and looking at the progression, and RDF, I think, came on the heels of RDA, after RDA.
Yeah, I remember RDA.
And it was this, right? So RDA, which is the micro format, so for those that don't know, which is like the markup for indicating more detail about the resource in a bibliographic record, in that MARC record. So the resource descriptive access and resource descriptive framework are very closely related.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are these really interesting bridges between the two spaces, from things being, within the library space only, and then our progression to the World Wide Web and searching. RDF came on pretty early within the search environment, the World Wide Web.
Yeah, and got adopted easily. RDA is a totally different story. It's a very elegant parallel that you have there. But I remember RDA as something, I fought for RDA also early in my career. But it had an unfortunate life.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah,
it did.
But it's a very interesting parallel. I haven't thought of it, but there you go. That's why these conversations are so interesting, Jessica.
Yeah.
And and I apologize for the listeners. I have been blessed with many listeners on this podcast, and thank you very much, each of you, for listening in. Please reach out. I know there's a lot of internal abbreviations going on here. Maybe it's a little different than the other episodes, but it's so important. I mean, it's so important that the data and tech community understands that there is a field of practitioners out there working with this background and having a lot to say. I mean, I can personally remember, this wasn't prepared, but I want to add this, that when the first time I saw a data catalog, I was like, you have got to be kidding. You call this you call this a catalog? You call this a catalog? I mean, I've been trained in the MARC format by memory. I had to by memory be able to do the MARC format. I know how to catalog stuff so that it can be found again, and I can guarantee you that it can be found again in multiple ways, in a very, very flexible and easy to use way for the end user. And then I saw these things. I was just like, you have got to be kidding.
Well, and that's where innovation happens. That's what's so fun about it. Not to put like a really, a word like fun, but it is fun to start to explore things outside of your immediate domain. Exactly. So I do think the value, even though there were some acronyms being thrown around that are domain specific, it's like, that's how innovation happens.
Exactly. You're completely right, Jessica. And so obviously that motivated me to write my book, but I also think that for you, I've been following you so much online, especially on LinkedIn, of course. And I can see the same kind of energy in your posts and your ideas, right? That our background gives us so much to contribute with. So I wanted to know, like, for you, given that this is one of the questions actually, given that you have been in the field some time now, what's your impression? Is there a better or worse understanding now than before in terms of what ontologies, taxonomies, and so forth, what they mean in the data community? What do you think?
I think that there is more understanding. There were progressions and bumps in the road, and I think that's going to continue. For example, there were lots of conversations about what semantic meaning is or was, and that was if we go back 6 months. And so growing and learning is hard, and it's semantic meaning explicit words. That's what the interpretation was, where once we passed and there was more of a common understanding of what semantic really meant from an ontology perspective, that it has to be understandable or semantic for machines and people, then we got over that hump. So I see this incrementally happening, and I think we'll continue to progress. It's just that one of the issues is, yes, it takes time. We are trying to hold the same value and standard as data engineering, which can move really fast.
Yeah.
Data engineering moves very fast compared to library and information science techniques.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So there is a little bit of tempered impatience. And so, yes, it's much easier to just download all of Wikidata and deploy that as your graph and call it a day. So then stepping back and realizing the implications of that, we learn. And then we learn that we must curate and be very specific. Something that I'm constantly saying is that, like, your graph and your taxonomy, your thesaurus, your graph is like your business's fingerprint. And that we should take care to curate and architect our taxonomies, thesauri, in knowledge graphs, because that's your foot out into the technology landscape, into the AI landscape. And if it's not exactly how you perceive your business, if you don't represent that correctly, then yes, your output from AI is not going to be great.
I want to dwell a little bit on that metaphor, Jessica. It's brilliant. What do you mean by fingerprint? It's the fingerprint of your organization. Can you put some more words on that?
Because it's sure. So if I was in the e-commerce business, just as an example, and I decided I don't have time for this, I'm just going to download Google's product taxonomy or IAB's product taxonomy, and use that to represent my business. Well, your business may not sell food and pharmaceuticals, as an example.
Yeah.
There are things that are specific to your domain, and then you may have another arm of your business that is nonprofit, and that's not represented, or you may have products that are not sold, or not represented, for example, in IAB or Google product taxonomy. So the risk of that is it's not curated and honed to represent how your domain exists within the greater world, the outer world, not inner world, but outer world. And so you're going to end up with a lot of noise and a lot of garbage. And you don't know how those concepts are weighted, for example. So there may be much greater representation of pharmaceuticals, which we all know, on the World Wide Web. And so then you end up with a lot of noise and a lot of irrelevant rendering or data, plus the concepts as they exist in relationship to one another may not exist in those common taxonomies. So you're not going to have the depth, and you're not going to render the return or the expected return because you're representing your business as like a cookie cutter. Nothing, there's nothing special, nothing individuated that sets it apart from anyone else. We know that the web works, broadly on, and is valued on clicks. And we know that the weight and the algorithms, how those are, impact search results. So you're dealing with a lot of external factors that could incorrectly prioritize certain concepts that are not your business's concepts or priorities.
Yeah. Oh, that's very, yeah, exactly. That's very precise. And so that's the value of, in short, that's the value of library information science in a broader tech and data perspective.
You posted about specificity.
Yeah.
Right.
And thank you for answering. Yeah.
It speaks to that, the levels of expressivity and specificity. And those are some concepts from the information and library space.
Yeah, exactly, about like how deep indexation terms go and how vastly they cover a specific topic. And I see many technologists not thinking about these elements because they think that given the fact that they are technologists, they just know better. And that is very destructive if they don't listen. I have met a lot of people, fortunately, that listened once I got into the debate and showed that I understood technical realities also, but I just had a second level or a deeper perspective on stuff.
What's interesting is, I mean, I don't know if you've seen this in the academic space, but within library and information science programs, I'm seeing a lot more, like, for example, San Jose State University, which is a great library information science program for master's program. They're offering data science certificates.
Yeah,
they're starting to offer data science courses specifically because, again, to bridge the two spaces, there's value.
There is a lot of value. Like my PhD supervisor was, I'm so proud of that. He so during he's older than me, obviously. So during the .com crisis or bubble, a lot of IT people got they lost their jobs. Obviously, some of them went to university. He taught some of those people, and eventually, some of the students that he taught ended up, because he taught them in library information science, these deeply technical people, some of them ended up creating the recommendation system on Amazon. Like you might also like that feature on Amazon was invented because of people studying library information science. That's a beautiful story. And anyway, These are anecdotes, Jessica, but it's been the conversation is already over. But it's been a pleasure to have you on. Where can
Thank
people?
you.
Where can people? Well, it's the pleasure is all mine. So, but where can people find you? Where should they follow you?
LinkedIn. I think that's probably the best space. I think LinkedIn, and I'm going to be doing a little bit more. I'm working on a book. So
oh, great. Yeah, I will definitely help you promote it once it gets out.
Thank you.
And also thank you to the listeners for tuning in and listening to the Data Democracy. I'm so happy that you listen. And Jessica, once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been great seeing you.